come from that top right play action pass. Wingard gets around both Cesar Ruiz and Kendre Miller to the top.
Yeah, it's going to be a rough season for the New Orleans Saints in 2025. And in this third NFL season preview in the NFC South, we're going to be answering if the New Orleans Saints can avoid embarrassment in the 2025 NFL season. And look, every single team in the NFL, they have talent, but I think that's a bare conversation, which is pretty obvious. You talk about players on this team who are really good individuals in terms of what they bring from a talent perspective. Alvin Kamara has been one of the most consistent running backs throughout his 8 seasons, now going into his 9th year in the NFL, signed a 2-year contract extension last year worth up to $24.5 million, keeping him on the team through the 2026 season. And despite not having an 1,000-yard rushing season in his 8 years, he's still been one of the better backs, consistently averaging nearly 4.5 yards per carry last year, having 228 carries for 950 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. And last year, from a really statistic standpoint, being his best season, even though the New Orleans Saints were an abysmal 5-12 last year. And then, does everyone remember throughout the first 2 weeks of the 2024 season when everyone was talking about the New Orleans Saints as being legit playoff and Super Bowl contenders? And then after starting off 2-0 with those wins against the Panthers in week 1, blowing out the Panthers 47-10, and then blowing out the Cowboys 44-19, they ended up following that up, losing 12 out of their next 15 games. Yeah, that was awful. That was very short-lived in terms of that conversation. And it just brings into the reality that this franchise has really been in since Drew Brees retired. If you haven't checked it out already, go check out my Falcons season preview after you watch this Saints preview. But I talked about them being tied for the second longest playoff drought. Well, the Saints are far behind, having the 6th longest current playoff drought in the league. They haven't made the playoffs since winning the NFC South in the 2020 season. Now's the last time any other team in NFC South won a division besides the Buccaneers, who have won it 4 years in a row, and in my personal opinion, have a great shot at winning it again. But for the Saints, they are positioning themselves to be one of the worst teams in the league this year. Easily, even in a division with the Carolina Panthers, who I think will be improved, and we'll talk about that in their season preview. But I think they're easily shaping up to be the worst team in the NFC South, and it might not be even close. Like I mentioned, they have a lot of veteran talent on this team, offensively and defensively. In terms of Cam Jordan going into his 15th season, been one of the most consistent and imposing defensive linemen and defensive ends in the league since entering the league in 2011. And they have a Demario Davis, who's been one of their foundational players since arriving on the Saints squad in the 2018 season after being on teams like the Jets and Cleveland. And even they've made some solid moves, like signing a Justin Reed from the Kansas City Chiefs, who has been one of the most solid safeties in the league since he's been in the NFL and from 2018, and was a huge catalyst for those teams back-to-back Chiefs Super Bowls in the 2022 and 2023 seasons, having 83 tackles in 2022 and 95 tackles in 2023. But those few players, like I mentioned, defensively, with a Justin Reed, a Cam Jordan, who's 36, mind you, and same thing with Demario Davis, he's 36 years old. These guys aren't going to be enough overall from a scheme perspective, and really they fit the reputation in terms of the Saints having a solid defense. But ultimately, when you have an offense that has incompetent and unreliable quarterback play, your team isn't going to get you anywhere. I've talked about this so much throughout previous videos that I've made, even season preview videos. If you don't have a quarterback who can make a difference at the position, and not necessarily even have to be a top 5 quarterback or even top 10, just be a serviceable, solid quarterback that can make the right throws and make solid reads and progression and not make mistakes that'll put your football team in a hole. If you just have a solid quarterback like that, you'll be straight. But when you don't have a quarterback that is solid, you do not matter. That's just the facts. It's nothing personal. It's just reality, and everyone recognizes that. Since Drew Brees retired after the 2020 season and Sean Payton left before becoming the Denver Broncos head coach in the 2023 season, they've been searching for the answer to reclaim that success that they were able to capture in the 2009 season, where they won their first and only Super Bowl in franchise history. And if you look at the Saints' current quarterback situation, they embody the definition of having lame duck, incompetent quarterback play. Everyone will point to the argument that, hey, they're positioning themselves to be terrible in 2025 to have potentially the top pick in the 2026 draft. And let's not rely on them having this idea, oh, they're going to get an Arch Manning, draft Arch Manning, bringing another Manning back to the Saints after his grandfather, Archie Manning, used to be the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints in the 70s. First of all, Arch Manning, there's a great chance that he's going to stay at UT for another year and not be in the draft until the 2027 season. So you can beat that dream away. And the reality is, though, that the best situation for them is to be awful this year so they can draft one of the better quarterback prospects prospects next year, because I'm not going to lie, I don't think Spencer Rattler, Tyler Shuck, or Jake Haener are going to be the long-term answers at quarterback. And let me be frank, okay, I'm not going to roast those players. Spencer Rattler, he had promise. He was one of the best quarterback prospects going into college and was looked at to be a potential top pick before, things just went awry and Caleb Williams took his job at Oklahoma, things of that nature too. And then for like a Tyler Shuck, he was solid at Louisville last year, had essentially a 63% completion percentage, throwing for nearly 3,200 passing yards, throwing 23 passing touchdowns and only 6 interceptions. But dude has been in college since 2018. He was in college from 2018 to 2024. I believe he was at one point a backup for Justin Herbert, and he's 25 years old, going to be 26 in September. So you're drafting a quarterback who's close to his 30s already in his rookie year. He's already nearly a finished product, and at times that can be a serviceable thing in terms of knowing what you have, but from a potential standpoint, how much more can his ceiling really rise? And that's why for the Saints, from a quarterback perspective, next year's draft in the 2026 draft is your best case scenario for finding your long-term answer at the position, because I don't think they currently have it right now in New Orleans. Cade Klubnik, maybe he'll be an option. He's continuing to improve throughout his few seasons starting at Clemson. He looks to have hopefully a great year that'll position him not only for Clemson to make a good run, but for him to be one of the top quarterbacks picked in the 2026 draft. I think a lot of people can say Lenore Sellers from South Carolina, he might have the most potential in the 2026 draft from a quarterback perspective. How athletic he is as a dual threat quarterback, a big body quarterback as well too, at that 6'3", 240 frame, and he's still only 20 years old, so a young quarterback who you can make the argument has a high ceiling. A Garrett Nussmeier who's 23 years old, will be 24 around the time of next year's draft, but an interesting connection there as well too, as the Saints offensive coordinator is Doug Nussmeier, who happens to be his father, so that will be a crazy connection there too. If things work out, Garrett Nussmeier has an amazing senior season in the 2025 year. Who knows, he could end up being the answer for the New Orleans Saints and stay in Louisiana, going from Baton Rouge playing for the LSU Tigers to the New Orleans Saints. So some of those quarterback prospects could be a potential option in the 2026 draft for the New Orleans Saints. I'm not gonna lie, guys, I'm not high on Drew Aller, but we'll see what him and Penn State does this year. But those are all better options in my opinion than what they currently have with Tyler Shuck, Spencer Rattler, and Jake Haener, because like I said, guys, they're not gonna do much this season in my opinion. With that though, they do have a few weapons on this roster, and I hated for Rashid Shaheed last year. He was so good last season, but ended up having a torn meniscus in week 6 of the 2024 season, which ended up ending that year, which started off very strong for him. You talk about those first couple of games the Saints had last year where they started off strong before turning into a hot mess. In that game in week 1 last year, he had 3 receptions for 73 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. That win against the Dallas Cowboys, he had 4 receptions for 96 receiving yards and a touchdown as well too. But just losing him last year, that was a huge loss, and they look to get him this upcoming season to be a catalyst and a weapon for this year, but hopefully in years to come as well too, as like I said, they're still searching for the long-term answer at quarterback. And then they have a Chris Olave too, a player who is really promising as well. You can argue that he's a top 20 receiver in the league, but he's dealt with some injuries, specifically in the concussion department, which is always a slippery slope too. And since entering the league in the 2022 season, he's had 2 seasons over 1,000 receiving yards. His rookie year, he had 72 receptions for 1,042 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. Then in 2023, he had 87 receptions for 1,123 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. But last year, he only played 8 games. Like I said, he missed some times with a concussion and things of that nature, and had only 32 receptions for 400 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. But I think this year, as long as he can stay healthy and not get hospital balls thrown at him by Derek Carr, who we all know retired surprisingly before the season started, I think that he'll hopefully be able to put up great numbers and be wide receiver 1 for this offense alongside of a Rashid Shaheed, which is a solid wide receiver duo. But at the same time, like I said, the quarterback play is not there. They're also having a reunion with veteran wide receiver Brandon Cooks, who was drafted to the Saints in the 2014 season and spent 3 seasons there before being traded to the New England Patriots in 2017. He returns after spending the last couple of years with the Dallas Cowboys, and he is 31 years old now and turns 32 in September. But I think that he's going to be a solid vet to add to that room, just to be another potential target for that offense and help be someone that is a voice in the locker room and things of that nature. I also love their first round pick though, drafting a left tackle out of Kelvin Banks Jr. from the University of Texas, one of the best offensive line prospects going into this 2025 NFL draft. Throughout his 3 seasons at the University of Texas, Kelvin Banks Jr. only allowed 4 sacks and 34 pressures out of a possible 2,641 college snaps, so that's a really good percentage, and he's shown that he's able to be consistent and a great protector at the left tackle position. So that's a beautiful thing for a quarterback to have that type of insurance at protecting his blind side if he is a right-handed quarterback. But also, I think that left tackle was one of the most underrated positions in terms of being one of the hardest to play in professional sports, and specifically in NFL, of course. Well, I think that Kelvin Banks Jr., he has the type of skill set to be reliable for them and be one of those foundational players for years to come, to be on the franchise for a long time, similarly on the defensive end for like how a Cam Jordan and Demario Davis has been. But those guys are guys that you want to win for, and those type of veterans. But if you don't have the competent team around them, like I said, they're not going to matter. And the past few seasons, they've certainly reflected that. Last year in 2024, they were 5-12. In 2023, it was better. They were 9-8, but still missed the playoffs. And then in 2022, they were 7-10. In 2021, the year after their final playoff appearance, they were 9-8 as well too. So they've been either mid or like last season, they've been terrible. You never want to be in that ballpark. You want to either be a contending team making the playoffs and being a Super Bowl contender, or being absolute shite. And last year they were absolute shite. So exactly, and I think that'll be the case this season. But like I said, that's probably the best case scenario for them. But avoiding embarrassment, that's another thing that we'll talk about more in this video. But I'm interested to see Kellen Moore as a head coach in this new role. And he had a really good season in terms of being offensive coordinator last year with the Philadelphia Eagles, which resulted in them winning the Super Bowl. And he was able to adjust his offense that was very run heavy, different from previous years, particularly in his tenure as he was an offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, who with a Dak Prescott offense ranked among the league's best in total yards and points scored. When Kellen Moore was offensive coordinator for the Cowboys, they ranked top 10 in the NFL 3 times during Moore's 4 seasons as offensive coordinator. They averaged the second most points per game in the league with nearly 28 points per game from 2019 to 2022, and they were second in the NFL in total yards per game with 391 from years 2019 to 2022. So with Kellen Moore, before getting to the Philadelphia Eagles, he was known for being a coordinator who utilizes an aggressive passing attack that emphasizes attacking downfield, especially when he's facing coverage like a single high safety. But with the Philadelphia Eagles, they knew their strong suit was playing through a Saquon Barkley, and they were able to adjust being a run-first team, even though despite having weapons in the receiving game like a Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, Dallas Goedert at the tight end position, they were still able to, of course, dump the ball off sometimes and get it to their playmakers' hands. But Saquon Barkley was the #1 weapon for that team, and it ended up winning them a Super Bowl. And also, Kellen Moore earned this opportunity to be a head coach. So we'll see how he is as a head coach in terms of also being a play caller potentially too, because it can always be a little bit more when you're calling plays as a head coach and being in that head coach and coordinating role. But Kellen Moore has been doing it so long, so I think that he has earned the right. I think that he'll be able to utilize that well, while at the same time his first year being a head coach. And I think it is intriguing as well too, as Brandon Staley is going to be the defensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints as well, after we know his not amazing tenure with the Chargers as a head coach there for 3 seasons before being fired to the mid or end of the season in the 2023 season before the Chargers hired Jim Harbaugh the following year. But when Brandon Staley was a coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams in 2020, and also worked as an assistant coach with the Bears and Broncos beforehand, with the Rams, his defenses, they were #1 in the NFL in terms of both total yards and points allowed, and they led the league in total defense, allowing only 281 yards per game, and scoring defense only allowing 18.5 points per game. Staley, he can certainly coach his butt off in terms of being a defensive coordinator. Now, head coach, like I said, there's a lot to be desired there, but that's a solid coordinator for a Kellen Moore to have in his first year as a head coach. But for me, still though, like I said, I think the ceiling for the Saints team in 2025 is very low. With that being said though, guys, before I answer the question if the New Orleans Saints can avoid embarrassment in this 2025 season, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram /Twitter and X at Swaggy Russ, on TikTok at Swaggy Russ02 for shorts, reels, all content and things to that nature. More podcast information soon that'll be transcribed from these videos, so stay tuned for that as well. And yeah, with all that being said though, guys, let's answer the question if the New Orleans Saints can avoid embarrassment in the 2025 NFL season. One thing that would mostly be favorable for most teams is the Saints schedule, because they have the second easiest schedule in terms of a strength of schedule perspective, only facing 3 opponents that made the playoffs last year in the Bucks in their own division, the Los Angeles Rams, and the Buffalo Bills. But even then though, I think that the teams that they're playing against this year, a lot of them, for example, like the 49ers, they have a better team. The Seahawks, they have a better team. The Cardinals, they have a better team. I'm just not seeing a lot of wins here when I'm looking at the Saints schedule for the 2025 season. But let's talk about it for real. In week 1, they play against the Arizona Cardinals, and I think that team is going to be improved and better. And if Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. can have a great rapport and be one of the better quarterback and wide receiver duos in year 2 together, they could be a playoff team. So I think the Saints will lose that. I think the 49ers, as long as they stay healthy, they have the chance to compete in the NFC West for their division and potentially make the playoffs. I think they'll lose that game. The Seahawks, they won 10 games last year, and I know they have a different quarterback now, and Sam Darnold, who had his best season last year, but I think that they'll they'll be better than the Saints as well too. You can look at 0-3 right there. Then they play against the Bills in week 4. I think that's 0-4. Self-explanatory right there. Even the Giants to an extent. And the Saints played the Giants last year and they won that game 14-11 in last December. But the Giants, they have a really good front seven. Abdul Carter being added to that, and I think that their offense will be improved to an extent. And they have Malik Neighbors, of course. So I think the Giants, they're a better team. That's 0-5 right there. The Patriots, they'll be improved under Mike Vrabel being the head coach. That's just another loss. I'm looking at these games right now. When is it going to be their first win? And then they play against the Bears, who interestingly enough had their previous head coach, who's not a defensive coordinator for the Bears, and Dennis Allen being a defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. The Bears are going to win that game for sure for him. And I think the Bears, they should be at least better than they were last year, being 6-11, I believe. So that's tough. And then they play against the Buccaneers, who we know have won the NFC South for 4 consecutive seasons and are looking to do it again this year. There's a bad break right there. The Rams, and they play against the Panthers. Of course, they're going to play against them 2 times this year. I think maybe they beat the Panthers once this year, so that could be a silver lining of them getting one of their wins. But then they play against the Falcons. I think the Falcons will be better than them. The Dolphins, even though I'm not too high on the Dolphins though, and I think that they'll be maybe like an 8-9 or 9-8 team. The Dolphins should beat the Saints as well. Buccaneers will play them again. The Panthers play them again. The Jets, they're going to be a tough football team, and you know, you can make the argument that maybe the Saints could beat the Jets in the regular season game, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Jets would win. They play the Titans. Maybe that'll be a good game in terms of seeing who's worse. And then they play the Falcons in week 18. So man, when I'm counting those games right there, I only see anywhere from 2 to 4 wins. So I think that they'll, even from a record perspective, be worse than what they were last year. And that's saying a lot, guys. But like I said, they have the second easiest schedule in comparison to other NFL teams, being ranked right behind the 49ers in terms of a strength of schedule. But even then, though, I still think that all the teams on their schedule mostly are better than them. So it's just not looking good for New Orleans this year. And they need a lot of reconstruction on this roster to really compete, because I just don't see it happening this season. And hopefully they don't judge Kellen more harshly on that this season. Like I said, if you don't have a quarterback and a solid, constructive offensive line and team overall, you're not going to really have success in this league, especially in the first season under a head coach. I mean, look, for example, for Kyle Shanahan in 2017. And I'm not comparing Kyle Shanahan to Kellen Moore at all. I think Kyle Shanahan is one of the best coaches in the league. I mean, we know his dad, Mike Shanahan, is one of the best coaches in NFL history. But even a Kyle Shanahan in the 2017 season with the 49ers, they were 6-10 that year. So sometimes it just takes time for these teams to get things together. And the reality, unfortunately, for New Orleans Saints down there in Louisiana, where the Saints are marching at, it's a rebuild right now that's been going on for a couple of seasons that's been really bad. And like I said, they've been mid to now in this season, and last year particularly, I think they're going to be awful this year. But y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments down below, because there's not a lot to really analyze in terms of what we believe will be a strong suit for them, besides potentially having a solid or competent defense, because like I said, they have some solid pieces on that defense. But even, for example, like I just mentioned, their offensive line, even though they drafted Kelvin Banks Jr. in the first round, who I think will be a solid piece for them going forward, they still have, according to PFF, the 22nd ranked offensive line going into this season. So that's not great. You're one of the bottom tier offensive lines going into the next season. They do have Eric McCoy and Trevor Penning, who were solid last season, adding in Kelvin Banks Jr. there too, but there's still a lot to be desired there, and it's hard to project overall how that offensive line will fare. And that's a bad shake right there too, because like I said, when you already have shaky quarterback play and then you add that in combination with an unknown of an offensive line, that can be overwhelming. And we've even seen that from a preseason perspective with a Tyler Shuck. But like I said, preseason, it's hard to really judge a lot of that because we're seeing a lot of 2s and 3s playing. But yeah, with that being said though, guys, let me know what y'all think in the comments down below. How y'all think the Saints are going to do? Can they avoid embarrassment? I think the only way for them to really avoid embarrassment is just being competitive and being a team that, you know, hey, they might end up being 4-13, 3-14, 5-12, something like that. But having a lot of potential, you know, 1-score losses or something like that too, or surprising a couple of contenders and upsetting them in some regular season games. I think that's the only way they avoid embarrassment. And you know, have some players like a Chris Olave who still has seasons like his 2022 and 2023 seasons where he's staying healthy, having a good year, things of that nature too. The defensive playmakers being potential Pro Bowl players and stuff like that in the midst of having a bad season. But I think that's the only way to really avoid embarrassment, because I think they're going to be bad. Or if one of the quarterbacks like a Tyler Shuck or a Spencer Rattler can emerge and surprise all of us and be the potential answer to a quarterback position, then, because in that aspect, then their 2025 draft pick, you know, could end up being for a weapon or a playmaker or something like that too. But that would be best case scenario for them. But I think that overall, it's just going to be a tough season to watch down there for New Orleans Saints fans in general. Let me know what y'all guys think about the Saints. That was the third season preview for the NFC South. And now lastly, for the next preview, we'll be talking about the Carolina Panthers. And then after finishing the NFC South division, we'll be moving on to the AFC South and starting with the Houston Texans, a team in my hometown, but that's not my favorite team. So let's keep that clear. But yeah, we'll be talking about the NFC South. And then further on for that, after the NFC South, we'll be talking about, it'll be the AFC South. Then after the AFC South, it'll be the NFC North. And then the last division that we'll be previewing is the AFC North, which in a lot of cases, for a lot of people's perspectives, can be argued as the best division in the league. So I think the NFC North and AFC North finishing off with those two divisions, that's a good thing though. But stay tuned for that, guys. Like I said, the season preview series has been awesome, and I appreciate the support that y'all been giving me on this. And this is a beautiful time, guys. We are getting closer and closer to the NFL season starting, 2 weeks away. Make sure you hit the like button and turn on post notifications. Like I said, follow me on Instagram/Twitter at SwaggyRuss and TikTok at SwaggyRuss2 for a lot more content and things of that nature as well, so we can connect and talk about sports, life, anything in general, guys. I'm here for you guys always. Keep being blessed and legendary. Keep Jesus Christ at the center of your lives always. Know that he is here for you and you have great purpose through him, and you can accomplish anything, guys. Remember that. So y'all keep being blessed and legendary. See y'all soon. Y'all have a good one. I love y'all. Y'all keep being blessed. Peace.
Boy.